Cool. Well, I'm excited to be here. I have been nervously sitting in my seat all day because I'm towards the end of the day, and now I can get this over with, and I don't have to be nervous anymore. But just a little about myself. My name is Seth Grover. I'm a contractor I think my official title is I'm a cybersecurity researcher, but I do software development. I'm a contractor for the Department of Homeland Security at the Idaho National Lab. And prior to that, my previous life, I was through a series of acquisitions, ended up working for McAfee and then Intel Security and then McAfee again, and then McAfee decided to leave my little hometown of Idaho Falls, Idaho, and I said I wasn't going with them. So we amicably parted ways, and I've been working at the Idaho National Lab since then. And I'm going to be talking a little bit today about kind of based on a project that I've been working on. And the basis of that, a large part of that work was getting Zeek logs into and kind of along with Moloch session data, because I think that, well, I'll talk about why in a minute, but that's what we'll be talking about today. So about how we can take our Zeek logs and get them in so that just side by side in the same pane of glass with the Moloch session data. And it's been going good so far, and hopefully there'll be something that you can take away from this. And I want to say, like, everything that I've got here is open source and up on GitHub, and I'll show you that project here in a few minutes. But even more so than like what I'm doing specifically, if you have the need to take some flat file log data that's not currently like viewable in Moloch, you can use these same techniques to do that. So even if it's something besides Zeek logs or whatever, this is how I went about the process of eventually getting it from a flat file of the Zeek stuck out into a directory somewhere into like at least this cool connections graph and stuff like that, like having it actually part of Moloch. So that's what we'll be talking about today. And I am gonna try not to talk too fast, but also try not to go on too many tangents. So we're gonna see, because those are both personality flaws of mine. I think probably everybody here is at least in some way or another familiar with what Zeek is, and I don't want to go into too much of like a basic explanation of that. But a lot of these bullet points are right off the Zeek.org website. Zeek is a terrific tool for doing network analysis and really getting out the important bits of information of metadata without having to, carry along the whole PCAP with you all the time. And it's very, very extensible and very flexible and scriptable and just it's a very, very terrific tool. But we're not at ZeekCon, we're at MolochON, right? And so the question is, why are we talking about Zeek at all in this? Doesn't Moloch already do a lot of the same things that Zeek does? And it absolutely does, but there are some, and so I'd say there's actually quite a bit of overlap, especially in some of the common protocols and common fields and stuff, the parsers that Moloch has, and then what Zeek's doing. There's a lot of overlap in those fields. But there are sometimes, one reason you might want to be using Zeek is there are instances in which case you can't do full packet capture. For example, some of the analysts that I work with are able to go in and do, they go in and do incident response or hunts or whatever, and there's like stipulations at these, they're critical infrastructure kinds of installations where they can't take full PCAP, but they're allowed to take the metadata out, right? And so they'll go and they'll capture Zeek logs or whatever in this air-gapped site and then carry the Zeek logs out with them, and that's all they've got. Or maybe, it's just an issue of storage or bandwidth where you're not able to store all the PCAP information. Now, in this case, a lot of the things that Andy talked about earlier, mitigates that with Moloch anyway, being able to filter out the TLS data and some of the different things like that. Another reason that you might want to use Zeek is the what I talked about a minute ago, the kind of extensibility of it, being able to go grab community plugins and community parsers that are out there on the on the internet. Andy said earlier this morning in his first presentation, I think, that Moloch's never going to be trying to target like what a Wireshark does, parse every single protocol that there is out there. That's not the goal that they're trying to approach. So in my particular field, we do a lot with industrial control systems protocols, and there's some there that that Moloch doesn't currently have parsers for. And then some of those are in Zeek, and we actually hope to be adding some more of those to Zeek. And how would we do that? There's this terrific templating language that Zeek has called binpack, and it's a way for you to define, kind of in a pseudo programming language-ish way, these template files that then end up creating C++ code that can be used by Zeek and other things as well. So if you wanted to write your own protocol parser or something, Zeek would be a way you could do that. So my Martin Luther King vision is, I have a dream where they can all play nicely together and everybody can hold hands and kumbaya, and that's kind of where we got to with this presentation. To use where feasible and appropriate Moloch capture to get the full packet capture and the spy data, and use Moloch Viewer's excellent payload analysis tools. And then in instances where Zeek is, where full packet capture is not an option, or maybe even just alongside Moloch. Like this project that I'll show you here in a minute that we've been working on, will do both. And having the Moloch session data and then the Zeek logs kind of in the same view, it's useful, I think. So that's kind of the idea. We're going to go over kind of how you get to that. Through ingesting Zeek logs into Elasticsearch directly, using Filebeat and Logstash to do the enrichment, and then using Wise data source stuff, which I've actually learned some about today, and I'm going to go back and improve some things and make my stuff a little bit better with what I just learned in the previous session, and then how you might correlate the data together between those two data sources. So the tool that I'm going to be I've got some links and stuff to GitHub. The tool that I've been working on, and it's kind of like that comic that you might have seen on the internet, right? Like where the guy comes up and hands, like one stick figure hands the other stick figure something, and he goes, "I made this." And then the stick figure's standing there, and he's like, "I made this." That's me with this project. I took a lot of other smarter people's than me's work and kind of made them talk to each other. And that's essentially what this tool called MolochON is. It is a Docker Compose-based framework of some great open source tools, including Elastic and Moloch and Zeek and Nginx to do reverse proxying, and ElastAlert to do alerting, and ClamAV to do file scanning of the files that are extracted by Zeek. And it's all just kind of in one nice little Docker Compose up container. So the use case for this project isn't maybe necessarily the use case that we've been talking about so much today with the giant installations and all their replication and different things, but it's kind of more targeting one-off incident responses or maybe smaller installations. We actually do have it deployed at some U.S. government sites that I go out and do deployments and stuff on. But take what you want. That's the cool thing about open source, right? Take what you want from it, and it might be useful to you. So if you go check it out on GitHub later, you'll see, I don't know, you can see my documentation for MolochON, and you can, I don't know, go clone it or whatever you want to do. Andy was kind enough to create a Slack channel for this because I had some people asking lots of questions about it. I'm Tlacuache in the Moloch Slack channel, so if you've seen a Spanish word that you can't pronounce, that's me on that one, and so you can ask me questions about it there too later, and my email will be at the end of this. So I'm not really here to plug my own thing. It's more just kind of to give you an idea of the context of what this project is that I'm showing you, these configuration files and stuff for Logstash in. This is where you can go and find those configuration files and play with it if you want to. So yeah, and then I kind of mentioned this already, but the upcoming development for MolochON will be heavily focused on improving our visibility into industrial control systems networks. We've got some Zeek parsers that we're working on, hopefully eventually quite a few of them for different ICS protocols that aren't really necessarily something you'd see in a corporate network, but which we're interested in supporting for national critical infrastructure. So where do we start with our Zeek logs? So the first thing that I wanted to look at was, okay, I want to get an idea for what Zeek's giving me and what Moloch has, and try to see where there might be any deficiencies in what I'm seeing out of Zeek to kind of bring them in parity with each other. And I think actually I can hear my laptop is making the sounds of my voice as I'm saying them. So I'm going to mute that because you can't hear it, but it's driving me crazy. It's like, you know, it's that delay and it makes me feel like I have schizophrenia or something. One of the first things I did was try to figure out where the gaps were between what Zeek was giving me by default and what Moloch had as far as kind of the general fields that we were getting. And so in Zeek, you know, if you're familiar with running it, you've got your local.row policy and enabling things like VLANs and MAC addresses that aren't turned on by default was one thing that I did kind of from the beginning. Some of these have been mentioned earlier. There's Zeek plugins for community ID generation, which is a flow hashing thing. That's really nice, so you can see, that's one of the things that I make great use of to correlate what the Zeek logs are, and then the corresponding Moloch sessions. And things like JAW3 and hash and some other stuff like that are some really good community plugins that you can enable. There's another one, I guess you'd pronounce it Bazaar, but it's like a BAZR. It's the MITRE attack. They just released these not too long ago either, I think. But it's like these MITRE attack scripts to look at things like that you'd see on Windows boxes that would indicate privilege escalation or lateral movement, things like that. So there's a lot of really cool plugins out there, and you can go turn them on in your Zeek configuration file, and that would look something like, it didn't follow the link when I clicked on it, but that's okay because I know where the source code is. Right, so there you go. So, oh yeah, there's my local.row file, and it's you know, very similar to just kind of the defaults, only I've like gone through and enabled MAC logging and VLAN logging and track all assets, and turned on the community ID creation and the quick HTTP3 stuff from the Salesforce version of that, and JA3 and all this other cool stuff. So just identifying what you'd like to have in your logs is kind of the first step that I took to getting, you know, to getting the data that I want to actually end up putting into Elasticsearch. Now, I'm not going to go into like how you run Zeek and stuff. There's plenty of great tutorials on zeek.org to do that, or a bunch of YouTube videos, so you can go find that. But at the end of the day, you'll run Zeek and you're going to end up with, whether you're tailing them off of like live traffic with Zeek or doing it with PCAP files or whatever, you're going to end up with some log files. What do you do with those log files? You use a log file forwarder. And in the Elastic ecosystem, Filebeat is a terrific way to do that, particularly if you're going to be forwarding Zeek logs from different disparate sources. Logstash is pretty memory intensive, and so I think that's why they created Filebeat in the first place, was to bring us to a point where you can have a lightweight shipper, and it's going to watch your directory of Zeek log files. And those are going to, you know, you've got your con.log and your weird.log and your notice.log and http.log and all these things. And basically what Zeek is going to be doing, Filebeat is going to be doing is looking at those directories, monitoring them for new files and changed files, and then forwarding them along up to the next step in our process. And so again, you know, you'll have essentially a Filebeat configuration file that looks, you know, something like this, where basically you're going to give it a path to log files that Zeek is going to be dropping these log files in, and then there's some parameters about like, do I want to close files when I see that they're inactive, or when I get to the end of the file, or do I want to keep it open because I'm tailing it? Those are all just kind of parameters that you can use to tell Filebeat what to do with the files that you're seeing. And that really depends on your use case. In MolochON, you can either receive Zeek logs directly from like a sensor appliance that we build, or we've got an upload interface where you can just like drop some PCAP files in and give them some tags and tell whether or not you want it to analyze them with Zeek, and then send them on their way. And then when it gets to the end of the PCAP file, those log files get created and then closed, and they get ingested into with Filebeat into Logstash. And then also we turn around and send them into Moloch capture, so we've got both sets of data side by side. Once we have got Filebeat sending our stuff to Logstash, this is, I think, where things start to get fun, and that is massaging and manipulating that tab delimited data or JSON formatted data into something that the Moloch viewer is looking to to query and actually show us. Because what we're doing here is completely just doing an end run around Moloch altogether, right? We're taking the data and sticking it in Elasticsearch directly, and then just counting on Moloch to query that data, which works terrifically. But what it does do is it puts the onus on on me writing this Logstash filter, basically to put things in the right way so that it's apples and apples when we're doing those queries. And so you're going to have two different possibilities for what your Zeek logs look like. Security Onion uses the approach of enabling the JSON output so that if new fields and stuff get added, they don't have to go update all the stuff, right? Unless they want to rename those fields. You just see it in the JSON input, and then they would get added into the database. In my case, because generally I do want to know what every field is, and there's some other plugins out there that we use or would like to use that do require us having the Zeek logs in the original tab delimited format. I looked, and my biggest bottleneck was trying to figure out how to parse these out with being able to support multiple different formats of the Zeek log, meaning, yeah, I can control my own local.bro file, but if someone else is turning some things on or off, or if there's a new version of Zeek that comes out and they add a field to the end of the dhcp.log, I want to be able to ingest the old data and the new data, and how do I do that? And so I went through these bunch of different gyrations to try to figure that out. In the end, I learned that the dissect Logstash filter, at least performance-wise, was better than both the Grok and the CSV filters, but it wasn't super flexible with different different incarnations of what that field might look like. And so I ended up doing some things where I'm actually, in the symlink to the file that I'm ingesting, putting some nice little extra metadata about that file itself in the file name, and then detecting that in my Logstash filter, and then doing some logic based on that. So that's what I mean here when I say talk about watch out for different log variations due to changes in your config or your Zeek updates. This is where a large portion of my work getting this all to work was in writing this Logstash filter. Let me see if I can go to that and just kind of give you an idea of what that looks like. Actually, I'm going to have it up in my text editor here somewhere over the rainbow. Too many windows. There it is. Okay, so this is my Zeek Logstash filter, and it's currently rounding out at around 4,000 lines of code. And the majority of it, there's kind of two big sections. One of them is for all of my different kinds of Zeek logs that I have, right? This is DHCP. Define what those fields are that are coming in, and how I want to name them. And then, so that's kind of section one, define my fields that I have in my Zeek log, and Zeek's got great documentation to go figure that out. And then the second half of my Logstash logic is any like additional kind of extra stuff. Enrichments is what I want to call it, to those fields, right? And so in this case, I've got this wonderful, nasty, expression that's basically saying, hey, if I see any of these patterns for IP addresses, I'm going to tag that as an internal IP address, else I'm going to tag it as an external IP address, right? So this is like the 192 and the 10 dots, but also it's like all your unicast stuff. And so yeah, there's a lot of logic in here to try to kind of get things the way I want them. And that's, oops, I lost my place. I think we're about right there. Okay, maybe not. I have to skip all the way through everything here in just a sec. Go, go, go. Yeah, it doesn't want to present. Why not? You know what? This is fine. We can just use this. Am I really? Oh yeah, I gotta alt tab it. You guys are so smart. I never do presentations. I just sit at my desk and code all day. This is unusual for me. So yeah, this is the Seth Grover show. It's not great. So the next step, once I got the Zeek field definitions, what those tab delimited fields are, I needed to go get the Moloch field definitions so I could figure out how to map the two. And luckily, they're stored in an index that Moloch creates called fields. And so you can run this curl query that I got off of the wiki at some point or another, and basically just say, hey, give me all of the definitions of the fields that Moloch created when it initialized its database. And you end up with a nice long list, Moloch fields mapping, that looks kind of like some JSON, right? And it's just big long list that goes through and it says, okay, when I see a field called, what you're going to see on the filters in the expression bar in Moloch is OUI.source. This DB field, DB field 2 thing is actually kind of like the underlying database field name, right? And so, like I've got in my slide here, I formatted that. I went through all of the Moloch fields and kind of picked out the ones that I knew I was going to make mappings for from Zeek. And then it's just a matter of doing that mapping. Now, it's never going to be a one-to-one, but there's actually, like I said, a lot of overlap. So I'm able to take Zeek.origh and go ahead and map that to source IP, and Zeek.origp and map that to source port, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Repeat for 4,000 lines of Logstash filter code. Now, Zeek's going to have some of those protocols that Moloch doesn't know about, and that's okay. I keep those because I'm going to show you in a minute that we create a wise data source and just make those native fields anyway. So they're just as good as if they were present originally in Moloch. But in a lot of cases, particularly with stuff that's common applications or stuff that's above the application layer, right? I can map a lot of my Zeek fields to those DB fields that Moloch showed us in its fields table. Now, one other thing I want to make a note of, I kind of hijacked a little bit of I did a little bit of hijacking on this one particular field in Moloch, and I'll show you why in a minute, called root ID. Root ID is the field that Moloch is using to, when you've got a session that spans multiple different, like that limit of, I think it's like default is like 10,000 packets, that it creates a new session, so it doesn't just keep growing forever. It uses this root ID that it assigns to link those together, so you can see the context of all of those. Zeek has a very similar idea, kind of, with this UID field. Each session in Zeek gets assigned a unique identifier, and so I'm using Moloch's root ID field for my Zeek logs to store Zeek.uid, so I can do something very similar conceptually, which is link all of my Zeek.log entries to one single ID that I can then filter on and see them all together. And I'll show you an example of that in just a minute. Oh, I'm getting close to the end of my time. So you can do some other enrichment, but like these are similar to what we're doing for WISE. There's Logstash filters for doing GIP lookups, for mapping MAC address OUIs to the vendor names. I've got my own custom mappings for things like, you know, I don't know, all sorts of stuff, different lookups that you can do. You can go look at that in that last, I've got this link here when you go look at my slides or whatever, go find it on my GitHub. You can see a lot of these enrichments that I'm doing for doing custom tagging or even writing your own Ruby code to further enrich those events. So the next part is making those Zeek logs appear natively in Moloch. And what I mean by that is, just like Andy was talking about at that last one, being able to create kind of this, this GUI interface for all of your Zeek fields. And I just learned like 20 minutes ago that I'm doing it the hard way, at least as far as some of that goes. But let me show you my WISE file. Also, I learned a couple of weeks ago from Andy that like I'm kind of abusing this a little bit by creating 700 and some odd different fields through my WISE API, but that's what this is in my WISE .js file. I'm going through and defining all of those different fields from my Zeek logs and which ones are terms and which ones are integers. So I go through and I call api.add field a whole bunch of times, and then there's my gigantic, ugly Jade HTML thing where I spit those all out. So yeah, it's great. It works perfect because what you end up with is something that looks like this. When I have these logs that are ingested, I see the Moloch. I probably ought to enlarge that. I see the Moloch session information, that metadata here, stuff on top. I've got a Zeek session section here that's got my common stuff across all my Zeek logs generally. This is like my, the source IP and dest IP and stuff. You'll see there's a lot of overlap between these fields and my ones here for my Zeek. And then I have, the stuff that's specific to con.log. The terrific thing about creating this WISE data source is those, when I zoom in, that does not look pretty. Those fields that I create through that WISE, they are like just exactly like Andy said a few minutes ago, they are just like regular other native Moloch fields. So I've got all of these Zeek underscore whatever fields that I've created, and I can use them in all of the different tools that Moloch offers, just as if they were natively created, which is super. It's very, very useful. So it putting it all together, Zeek logs and Moloch sessions will coexist in the Moloch viewer. You'll see them both show up in your sessions list or in your spy view or whatever, but it's not exactly apples to apples. And what I mean by that is a Moloch session is all of the things that happened in that session. In Zeek logs, one session might consist of a row from con.log, 5 rows from http.log, one weird.log, and a notice.log. So those different Zeek log entries, I'm not doing any kind of an aggregation on them. I'm putting them in as log files, not exactly as sessions. Now you can use my root ID trick that I talked about earlier to tie those together. The other thing that I found was needed was creating views in Moloch to differentiate. So I created some in my settings here, in my views, right? I've got a view for pcat files, which is basically if you don't have a Zeek log type, then that's a Moloch session. And then on the other hand, I say if you do have a Zeek log type, that is a Zeek log. And so when I'm browsing my sessions, I can do things like, if I want to see stuff, let's go a little bit bigger range here. If I want to see Zeek logs from my time period that I don't have the pcat for, I can just go select Zeek log here. If I want the stuff that I do have the Moloch tie-ins to those pcaps, I can just select pcat files. And so that helps you kind of, if you need to differentiate between one or the other. The other thing I did was I made this Zeek log column a default in my configuration so that when I'm looking at a particular, let me show you an example here, a particular session, right, I will see the, so this one's the Zeek log component of this, right, because it's got con there, it's from con.log. And then here is the Moloch, the corresponding Moloch data. Like I said, in this case, I've got the data coming in from both. Now, that is kind of the final thing is how do you take a session and either like coming from Zeek or coming from Moloch, see the other half of that, right? See the other side of the coin. As I'm looking through my data and I've got something that came from Zeek.logs notice file and I end up with a Zeek connection UID, if I've also got the Moloch PCAP data, how can I see those together? And we talked about one of those already. One of the ways is you can tie that Zeek UID to see all the different sessions together across the Zeek logs. The other thing you can do is use these other fields that have been mentioned earlier today. Community ID is like an open standard for flow hashing. Things like J3, TLS fingerprinting, those are ways that you can do filters that will be the same across your Moloch sessions and your Zeek logs and see it together. So let me just show you one example of that and I'll quit. And actually, I came to it here a minute ago. So if I was looking from either direction, but let's say I'm looking from the Moloch side of it, I've got the session data for this session here, and I've got my Moloch entry for it. You'll see here that Moloch did the community ID creation for me here, and I'm searching on that. And so what I see is the entry from Moloch, which has got all of these URIs that it saw in this HTTP connection. And I've also got, zooming in is not too handy, I've also got my con.log entry. And you can see, a lot of the data in both of them is identical, right? Because Zeek and Moloch are doing similar things to parse that data. However, I may also have other Zeek log data in addition to con.log for this session. And so I can go ahead and take this root ID field, which I'm mapping to Zeek connection ID, right? And I can OR that in with my current query, where I'm doing community ID is this, or my Zeek UID is that. And what I end up with is a list of all the other stuff that Zeek also knew about that session, right? In this case, there's not a whole lot extra besides what Moloch got out of it. It got the URIs, it got, whether it was a 404 or whether it was a 200 or whatever. But that's just kind of the approach that I take to correlate the Zeek logs and the Moloch sessions. It works really well, whether you're coming from the Zeek side to look at the Moloch session or the Moloch side to look at the Zeek logs. Using filters intelligently and then making sure that things are mapped the same is terrific, and even so useful as to, with the WISE stuff that Andy was saying a little about before, you can then create other tools even that also use these things. For example, I've got this value here in my log, and I use the right-click functionality, or left-click, or whatever we're going to call it, to create a URL here that I can then just automatically open up and filter on in Kibana and do further. Oh yeah, great. I picked one that I told you something would fail. Anyway, normally it would show you something here. I don't know why it's not. So yeah, it's really cool. If you want to, I'll post my slides up, or I gave them to Elise, I think, earlier. I know that was kind of a lot in a short period of time, but just kind of my thoughts on how you could take a flat file that would maybe exist well in the Moloch ecosystem and get it into the database normalized and being able to use it. I think where this is going to play out for us and my team and my project a lot in the future is taking new Zeek parsers that we write, whether in this, whether I'm paying for it or another project is paying for it, right, or something out in the open source community, these Zeek parsers that Moloch might not necessarily know about. Yeah, I could go in and I could search for that port number or whatever in Moloch and then export it to Wireshark, but this saves us kind of that hassle of having to do that, or at least maybe gets us there a little bit faster, where we can import those parsers and use them in Zeek, and then just see them in Moloch as if they were native parsers minus the PCAP, and do whatever we want to do hunting from there. So anyway, if you want to go check out all that stuff that I linked is on our GitHub page for this project called Malcolm. It's named after Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park. I can't remember why, but that's why we named it that. Probably because that's the best character in any movie ever. And if you want to email me with questions or grab me or whatever and talk to me, I'd be happy to help you out that way. So thank you very much for your time.